recently made a video called The Problem with Libertarians, and it's been making its rounds. And a few folks have asked me what I thought of the video, and maybe I could do a response video. So I took a look at it and jotted down some notes, and here you go. Here's Lauren's video and what I think of it. And by the way, Lauren, if you don't want to watch to the end, I invite you to have a conversation with me. Let's sort ourselves out, so to speak. I appreciate the work that Lauren's doing. I think she's doing some valuable work. And, I obviously have some disagreements with her here about the problem with libertarians, but I think these are things that we can have a rational conversation about, and I think she raises some legitimate concerns. But here you go. Here's what I think.
Could all the real libertarians please stand up? No, seriously, where have you guys all gone?
Hi.
Barely a day goes by without hearing of some group or another splitting off from the libertarian movement. Some have turned into Bernie bros like Daily Beast writer Andrew Carell. Others have just settled as Republicans like former Libertarian Party presidential candidate Austin Peterson.
Out of those supporters, 98% or more said run as a Republican.
Others have even become full-on social justice warriors like Will Wilkinson of the Niskanen Institute. And of course, many former libertarians are turning to nationalism, and even to its most extreme manifestations in the alt-right.
Some people have even become wildly popular internet sensations, traveling the world, spreading big, important ideas. This is nothing new. In the past, libertarian alumni have become wildly popular presidential candidates. Libertarians are going everywhere. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
It's this last group, of course, that seems to be causing the biggest headache for establishment-minded libertarians, with the Never-Trumpers now claiming there's a libertarian pipeline to the alt-right. Libertarians reply saying there is no pipeline between their ideology and any movement, let alone the alt-right. And you know what? They're completely correct about that, because you don't need a pipeline to get people off the Titanic. And I'm not just being facetious, I mean that. Libertarianism has been shipwrecked. Not because former libertarians have suddenly decided they love massive intrusive government. Suspicion of authority has, if anything, gotten stronger in the past few years. Trump's slashing of regulations is making the US economy boom. Cultural libertarianism is on the ascendant, and you'd think the ideology would be raking in supporters. But instead, even longtime supporters are totally abandoning it.
The voting counts for libertarian parties keep going up and up. Maxime Bernier almost won leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, and he's widely touted as a libertarian. It's becoming more and more popular to associate politicians that you support as being libertarian leaning. I mean, I remember the media touting Stephen Harper as libertarian leaning. I get hit up by mainstream politicians all the time looking for my support. Why is that? Why are mainstream politicians looking for the support of the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada? Well, it's because they recognize that there's a growing movement of people that want less government, and they want my blessing, I guess. James Damore, the guy that got fired from Google, identifies as libertarian leaning. Even Ken Bone, remember the guy in the red sweater vest? He identifies as libertarian leaning. He was on Bill Maher, the show the other day, talking about how he's libertarian leaning. So, this started out as about 25 people back when Murray Rothbard and Walter Block were about the only libertarians around. And now it's multi-million people, and it keeps growing. And this does create a challenge because, libertarians tend to be fiercely individualistic. And so that creates all sorts of challenges for organizations because, libertarians, frankly, they don't want to compromise, right? So if you're on a team, you got to compromise sometimes. And, well, libertarians like to take their ball and go home if they don't get their way sometimes. That's, our individualism is our greatest strength, but it can be our greatest weakness sometimes. And so you can imagine a group of people as individualistic, as determined, as opinionated, and as non-compromising as Lauren is, all working together towards the same goal, but all having different opinions about maybe how to get there and what type of message the organization should be putting out and that sort of thing. And you can appreciate how difficult it would be to manage that kind of organization and to keep it going. So it's there's nothing new or unusual about libertarians getting spit out of the party or spitting out of different institutions and going off and doing their own thing and starting something else. And that's all great. I mean, this is a growing decentralized movement. Lauren seems to be upset with something she calls establishment libertarians. And it's not really clear who she's talking about here. You get the impression that maybe it's people who disagree with her about borders or something like that. But she seems to conflate, people at Reason and Cato with people from the Libertarian Party and the Canadian Libertarian Party with the U.S. Libertarian Party. And it's not very clear who the establishment libertarians are. She hangs out with libertarians all the time. I would argue she is a libertarian. How do you determine who an establishment libertarian is? It's very, identifying who the enemy is here, the establishment. Well, I'm guessing that she has some ideas about how to identify those people.
Just look at, well, me. To the surprise of some people, I still hold most of the exact same values I held when I ran as a candidate for the Libertarian Party of Canada back in 2015. Yet I want nothing to do with the movement styling itself as libertarianism, and they sure as hell want nothing to do with me. When I was kicked out of the party, it was done under the banner of Libertarianism 2.0, the slightly more cringeworthy cousin of Atheism Plus, twice removed. Yeah, the same social justice infiltration that caused Atheism Plus to destroy the atheist movement has taken a hold in libertarianism.
I'm assuming by Libertarianism 2.0, Lauren means an approach to activism that I encouraged our party members to adopt. It wasn't mandatory, but it was just something that I went around preaching. And you can see from the slides here, it was stuff like stop focusing on others and look in a mirror every now and then. Instead of speaking like a victim, try speaking like an entrepreneur. Instead of fixating on problems, how about focusing on solutions? Instead of imagining you have to overcome resistance, how about you imagine you're trying to attract people to your ideas? Instead of amplifying differences, how about leveraging common ground? Instead of being an instant asshole when someone's irrational, how about you try and figure out what they're trying to say and what their concerns are and addressing them there? Or as Jordan Peterson would say, tidy your room and sort yourself out. So Libertarianism 2.0 had more to do with developing your character as a person than anything else, and focusing inward on the things that are within your power to change, but that are largely ignored, so that you can be more effective at persuading people. It had nothing to do with social justice or leftism. It was all the same type of stuff that Jordan Peterson is now preaching, and that's so popular. So pretty much the opposite of the way things are being portrayed here. Now, when you're constantly looking for infiltrating leftists and SJWs, I suppose you're going to find them. And of course, this concept I was promoting of developing your own character as opposed to cutting other people down all the time seems to have been characterized as having been influenced by this sort of wishy-washy kumbaya libertarianism, probably because it wasn't in the traditional kind of pugilistic style of libertarianism where everyone else is stupid, weak, status sheep. Right.
You have feminist libertarian writers publicly shaming libertarian men for tweeting memes in order to make the movement safer for women. You have Reason magazine saying that Christina Hofstummer's freedom feminism has nothing to offer feminism or libertarianism. And you have trend-chasing racial masochists who try to force libertarianism and Black Lives Matter together on the basis that the defense of liberty can't do without identity politics. All things considered, it's no surprise that the only people left in the libertarian movement act like this.
Goodbye.
So what Lauren listed here is what you'd expect when a movement's growing. If libertarians were insignificant, you wouldn't see attention whores, using the platform to prance around on stage. You wouldn't see celebritarians trying to increase their social media views, and you wouldn't care so much about the state of the libertarian movement. that you take the time to make a video about it.
This is not the ideology of Friedman, Mises, or Hayek, or even John Stuart Mill or John Locke. So how did a movement that stands for so many of the values Western civilization was built on devolve into nothing but a seastead of misfits who are as divorced from reality as they are from social graces? Well, it started with libertarians' increasingly codependent and clingy love affair with people and institutions simply because they have money.
There are people and institutions attached to libertarianism that have all sorts of money. Where are these people? I'd like to know about them. You know, here I cashed in my retirement savings. I quit my profession at the top of my career. And I did that all so that I could run for prime minister, knowing that I would be lucky to get 1 or 2% of the vote. So I'm not sure what Lauren's talking about here. None of the people I know who are in the Libertarian Party of Canada or in the US LP are people who make any money doing this establishment libertarianism. Maybe the people at Cato and Reason are able to earn a decent paycheck, but these people aren't the tens of thousands of volunteers who sacrifice their time, money, and opportunity to spread the same message that Lauren is spreading, essentially. I mean, the central whipping boy for the libertarian derangement syndrome is the chairman of the USLP, Nick Sarwark. And he's a used car salesman. A used car salesman. You know, I'm a firefighter. I put wet stuff on red stuff. You don't think I'd like to make money doing libertarianism? It's almost bankrupted me. When do I get my payday?
Professions of affection towards big business and an insatiable fetish for corporate power and wealth have alienated many former libertarians from the movement. In America...
Oh, the Koch brothers. Yeah, you know how the right loves to hate George Soros? Well, the left really hate the Koch brothers. You know, it's a common trope on the left that the Kochs are just a bunch of crony capitalists, even though they're fighting to end the very subsidies that they themselves collect. So let's assume that the Kochs are crony capitalists. The fact that they donate to Reason Magazine doesn't necessarily make Reason Magazine crony capitalists. I haven't seen anything from them supporting corporate subsidies or rent seeking. Anyways, Reason Magazine is not the libertarian movement, so it's not clear how this is evidence of libertarians being corporate shills.
Corporations are people, legally speaking. Imagine you had a movement dedicated to treating these people as victims, like the left's treatment of women and black people, and you have modern establishment libertarianism. All they're missing is a hashtag like #StockTickerLivesMatter. In practice, this means that, like their PC cousins, modern libertarians will twist everything, including the words of their supposed intellectual idols, in order to protect sacred corp.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not buying the whole corporate fetish argument. All libertarians I know preach against corporatism and cronyism. All libertarians I know support free markets. So I'm not seeing any evidence here.
Take Ayn Rand. Supposedly Rand is the ultimate apologist for big business in the libertarian canon. But if you actually read Atlas Shrugged, you'll see that Rand attacks business people who rely on government subsidies at least as hard as she attacks envious anti-capitalist intellectuals. In fact, one of her biggest villains in the book is the corrupt steel magnate named Orrin Boyle, who can only keep his business open because of government help. Of course, he masks this by lecturing the book's heroes for being selfish. So in other words, Rand tells us to be wary of a subsidy-guzzling monster who sanctimoniously and hypocritically tells others, "Don't be evil."
Did you know that Ayn Rand collected Social Security? So was she a subsidy-guzzling monster who sanctimoniously and hypocritically tell others, "Don't be evil"? Well, maybe by her own standards she is, but not by mine. No, Ayn Rand wasn't evil, even though she had a choice that corporate CEOs probably don't. She could have turned down Social Security. CEOs who don't take subsidies and don't take every legal cronyist advantage available to them can be held legally liable for breach of fiduciary duty to their shareholders. So I don't hate Ayn Rand for taking Social Security. I don't hate people for driving on publicly funded roads or using socialist healthcare here in Canada. I don't think they're hypocrites if they use that and preach against it. And I don't hate the player. I hate the game. That's what libertarians tend to focus on, the game, not the player.
Who does that sound like? Gee, maybe Google, Facebook, and Amazon, who libertarians seem to be doing plenty of white knighting for these days.
Some right-wing populists have even advocated using the power of the state to force private tech companies to be run like quasi-governmental public utilities.
Since it has the power to censor the internet, Google should be regulated like the public utility it is.
None of this is a principled commitment to capitalism. It is a religious attachment to capital itself and a sycophantic defense of those with capital.
Now, I'm not entirely clear what her point is here. Is she suggesting that the populist position is correct? That these corporations ought to be run like quasi-public utilities? But look, as far as I can tell, libertarians are about the only people who point out the reasons these companies are so bloody big, why there isn't more competition, and why they have these kind of weird policies that don't serve the customers emerge. And of course, they all come back to the state. What Lauren seems to be doing here is essentially making the same argument that Gary Johnson made when he said, bake the cake. If I recall, Gary made the point that the degree to which a business relies on cronyism is a degree to which they should be obliged to bake the cake because they become, in some sense, a pseudo-public company. In other words, if they're the only bakery in town because government has raised the bar and restricted competition, and it's difficult for other bakers to enter the marketplace because of this cronyism, then government ought to force them to bake the cake. And I'm guessing that Lauren is saying that because there's an oligarchical arrangement between corporations like Google and the government, that there ought to be some criticism lodged Google's way for ostracizing and censoring people on their platforms. And I think that's a fair point. But I think most libertarians stick to focusing on the roots rather than the branches here, like Gary and Lauren seem to be doing. You know, the roots are rotten and they emerge from government. And so you have crooked branches like Google, YouTube, Facebook that emerge and take an ungodly market share and don't give consumers the product that they ultimately want. And yes, in all honesty, I waver from being critical of these corporations to being super grateful for these companies. You know, I'm old enough to remember what life was like when we had to buy bookshelves full of dictionaries to learn a fraction of what we can learn now just by typing in a search term on Google. I can remember navigating around town with a paper map and trying to unfold it and not rip it. And now I can get audible directions on my phone. You used to have to get published to get your ideas out into the marketplace of ideas. And now you can do that every day on social media with ease. So yeah, a big part of me feels utterly ridiculous, like a spoiled child, complaining about the amazing technology and services that we take so utterly for granted. It's amazing how quickly we feel the world owes us something that never existed a few years ago. But they do have some crappy policies, and they aren't very good to some of their customers in ways that are a predictable result of immense government intrusion into the marketplace. And yeah, the corporations that are the best at navigating the game of cronyism are the ones that tend to rise to the top. There's nothing wrong with casting aspersions on them, and many of us do, but let's not forget who's holding all the guns here. Let's not forget who makes the rules of this shitty game. Let's make good and damn sure we aren't doing things that give these rule makers even more power to make their shitty rules. This is why I part ways with Gary and Lauren and the populists on this issue. As much as I want the baker to bake the bloody cake, as much as I want Google to stop deplatforming unpopular opinions, I don't want thugs with guns forcing them to do the right thing. I'm less interested at trimming some leaves and more interested at hacking at the root, in other words. And, now I see Ezra Levant is promoting trust busting these big corporations as a solution to the problem of their crappy policies. And I can see the populists moving in that direction as well, because that's what we need, more government to fix the problem that government created.
Now, once they've finished their daily ritual prayers to Wall Street, I know that establishment libertarians will probably respond saying, "Gee, Lauren, if you care so much about what libertarian intellectuals say, why do you ignore them on free trade and immigration?" First off, I'm pretty sure only someone as stupid as Kim Jong-un believes the idea that free trade is bad all the time. If you could get every single country on Earth to let down their trade barriers completely and quit manipulating their fiat currency, you'd probably have a more economically efficient system. But that's like saying socialism would work great if only everyone would stop being so selfish. It's never gonna happen. Countries profit massively from trade where one side is completely open and the other is protectionist. Even the founding fathers do that.
So Lauren seems to be siding with the protectionists here, which is weird because I thought she was against cronyism. It's exactly the same thing. I mean, it's almost a unanimous consensus among economists that unilateral free trade benefits a nation regardless of the policies of other nations. You know, a country that has protectionist policies hamstrings its own economy. It's like a person pointing a gun at themselves and saying, if you don't sort yourself out, I'm going to shoot myself. Yes, some corporations are going to get run out of business when consumers buy an $1,000 iPhone from China instead of a $4,000 phone made locally. But if your argument is that this is bad for the local or national economy, I'd suggest going back and reading some Friedman, Hayek, Mises, or Hazlitt. Yeah, politicians implement protectionist policies because it gets them votes, right? Unions and corporations that wield a lot of influence like protectionist policies. They have to cave to the dairy farmer cartel or else they don't get elected. The unions, the manufacturing, the business cartels, they all make sure politicians get elected. And if you don't cater to them, you're not going to get elected. Look at what happened here in Canada with Maxime Bernier, who ran a principled campaign against dairy cartels. He was, by all accounts, poised to be Canada's version of Ron Paul. And he lost because he wouldn't cave to these cartels. He just stuck with principle. And meanwhile, we have Andrew Scheer, who knows this type of protectionism is bad for Canada. But we have to be pragmatic, see? We have to compromise here or we're going to lose the country to the libtards. And look, this has been the refrain from conservatives for decades. There's always a hobgoblin that is threatening our destruction, and it requires us to pragmatically abandon principles that Western civilization is built on so that the libtards don't get control and create a catastrophe. You know, what did George Bush say? I abandon free market principles to save the free market system. Okay, whatever, George. But the conservatives have been saying this in one form or another for years. We got to shoot Canadians in the foot here, or the liberals will shoot Canadians in the head. And government continues to grow despite all this pragmatism. But I'm sure that libertarians and our 1% of the vote will be blamed.
The main reason Hamilton and Jefferson used free trade rhetoric was so that they could export cheap goods from America, meanwhile supporting protectionist policies that limit the influx of goods, not for economic reasons, but to protect sovereignty. There was, however, one group that was against protectionist trade, but if you're a mainstream libertarian who's more terrified of being called racist by your liberal friends than just about anything else, it would be pretty awkward to worship the Southern slave owners that opposed protectionist policies towards the wages of Northern industrial workers. Policies they didn't really need because their workers were slaves. Abe Lincoln is lucky Reason magazine wasn't around in the 1860s, or America might never have stopped importing black people to do cheap agricultural work. Speaking of, let's talk about immigration. Of course, big business apologists would support open borders. Borders only help the poor, the moochers who can't afford to donate to their think tanks or fly out to their regional conferences. And it stops the cheap flow of the Russian hookers, rich foreigners, and Mexican nannies. So you'll repeatedly hear, hey guys, the free movement of people is great. Cheap labor helps the economy grow and lowers prices for all Americans. Plus, having border controls isn't very freedom-loving of us. We gotta let everybody come to this great nation. And all the while, they somehow forget that we live in democracies with vast welfare states, and that even libertarian hero Milton Friedman agreed that both democracy and welfare collapse when you let the whole world cross your borders. This is where some libertarians would say, get rid of the welfare state. Illegal immigrants are barred from using the welfare anyway, so why does it matter? Well, they still have kids who are citizens, and pro-welfare politicians will always find ways to sneak them into the voting booth. In fact, even if you did hypothetically destroy the welfare state, in a democracy, large companies, NGOs, and any interest group can literally just import voters to get their way, and good luck shrinking the state after that.
So the first assumption here is that libertarians are all open borders. We're not. However, the one thing that open borders and closed borders libertarians have over nationalists and progressives that are closed and open bordered is that we are either closed or open borders for the right reasons. Libertarians aren't basing their opinion on feels. We're looking for an underlying principle or evidence. So in a sense, an open border libertarian is right that the state has no right to stop a person from moving from one piece of private property to another. And the closed border libertarian is right that the state has no inherent right to force them into a relationship with people they don't want to be tied to. Some libertarians make viable arguments for no particular orderism. It doesn't matter which way the government can be restrained first. If we can restrict government from interfering with migration before we can get it restrained from redistributing wealth in the form of welfare, then so be it. If we can get government out of welfare before we get them out of borders, then so be it. Now, I tend to agree with Lauren here that the order probably does matter, and that while we have a large welfare state, it behooves us to have a selective border policy. This is why in the last federal election, I advanced a platform as leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada that allowed individual citizens to sponsor immigrants and be held responsible for their integration in society, both financially and from a liability standpoint. In other words, if these people they sponsor engage in criminal activity, then the citizen had some liability on them as well. It's not a perfect solution. There's holes in it and problems with it, but it seems to me that getting the immigration policy out of the hands of government bureaucrats and ideologues was better than trusting government to implementing something effective. But while libertarians are struggling with principles and figuring out which policies to advocate for to get us moving in the right direction, everyone else is fighting over their feelings. On the right, you have people who get their panties in a knot because there are too many others coming in and ruining my country. How do we know when we have the right border policy with these people? Well, it's when their anxiety is gone. And sometimes all it takes is a strong authoritarian daddy to tell them everything's going to be all right now, and they're satisfied. But on the left, of course, you have people competing with each other to be seen as compassionate from the safety of their gated communities, which are far removed from the social decay of the barrios and the public housing projects their virtue signaling eventually create. But hey, as long as you have a strong mummy in charge, well, you can feel A-okay. It's like government has become a giant pacifier, a sucky for a nation of infants.
So as a desperate final breath, some libertarians will just go full anarchist and say, get rid of the government totally, then we can have open borders. Okay, great. How? By donating to Cato? By following Reason on Twitter? I mean, sure, it's a nice idea in theory, but without some Fallout-style catastrophe, it ain't happening anytime soon. And no, North Korea, that is not an invitation.
So most libertarian activists also understand that culture and demographics matter a great deal. In fact, they're almost the only thing that matters. That's why they're activists. They understand that the government we have emerges from the belief system of the population, and this is why we do what we do. We understand that the only way to get a more restrained government and a society that respects individual liberty is when we have a population that embraces liberty, not just for themselves, but also for the people they worry about the most. And so, yes, Lauren makes a point that open borders libertarians have to address. Do you think that moving in a large population of statists or theocrats or welfare dependents is likely to result in a smaller or bigger government? Obviously, it's going to result in a bigger government because the demographics have changed. And closed border libertarians also have some explaining to do. They have to be ready to explain, for example, why they're against open immigration if it's shown that it results in more liberty. Like, what if it turns out that most of the people coming in are less likely to be dependent on welfare, are more likely to be fleeing a big intrusive government and value freedom, and are more likely to hold conservative values than the native population? Are they still going to be against that, even though it turns their society more conservative and smaller government? What about the root of the problem, right? So, a migrant crisis is a symptom of a disease, and how are you going to deal with that disease? What are you going to do about the massive influx of people migrating through the birth canal of Canadian women, right? I mean, these people, these babies, they grow up to believe that government ought to look after them from cradle to the grave, and that government is a committee of virtue there to grant every wish and take away all their fears. So you can completely close the borders tomorrow, and you'll barely make a dent in the growing instability of Western civilization that we all sense. We still have the problem. What are you going to do about the culture that's lost its way and is continuing to decline? I mean, are you going to go Westboro Baptist on them? Are you going to picket their sinful gatherings? Are you going to rant at them? Are you going to shame them? You're going to make fun of them, trigger them, and hope they reveal themselves as the sinners they are? I mean, maybe that's fun. It's cool watching these people explode, but this isn't an easy problem to tackle, is it? I mean, I prefer the Joel Osteen approach to preaching liberty, friendly prosperity gospel, but it's kind of hard to do that sometimes when you see hellfire and brimstone fast approaching. I'll give you that.
The purist libertarian position on free trade and borders really speak to an adherence to an abstract politics of principle devoid of any real-world context. Their ideology relies on every nation in the world having libertarian policies and every culture in the world understanding and living by libertarian values. But outside the reason Cato YAL Beltway axes, where people have not washed down every axiom of libertarian theory with a river of Kool-Aid, people realize that a free culture needs borders to protect that freedom from cultures hostile to freedom. They understand that a ragtag team of nationless individualists won't be able to stop an invasion from Russia or China marching as one nation.
Well, I mean, it seems like a ragtag group of libertarians did a pretty good job at running off redcoats and forming America. A ragtag militia defended Canada from America in 1812. The fact that the entire military might of America and the Soviet Union has had a pretty rough time dominating a ragtag group of goat herders in Afghanistan seems to indicate that there's something to a nation that has a culture that is fiercely independent, well-armed, and sees defense as a personal duty. I mean, that's the hardest type of nation to invade and annex. People won't even do that. The Japanese didn't want to invade America because of that. Now, a nation, on the other hand, that has a big government and looks to government to solve all its problems is a nation of weaklings, and that's pretty easy to defeat.
I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers. I want it all too. I want no government with no fear of authoritarian cultures coming in and creating a worse dictatorship. But in our current state, that doesn't seem possible. So I'm left in the same camp as many people who have abandoned establishment libertarians, but are still hypercritical of government. I'm going to fight for the things I believe will have a genuine pragmatic impact on the size of the state instead of purity spiraling. Closing the borders while the welfare state exists, trying to keep out authoritarian cultures, promoting alternative currencies, fighting for lower taxes, opposing restrictions on our free speech even if they do come from crony corporations. These are real things we can do, and that's why many libertarians are tired of the establishment movement not offering real solutions or rejecting them because of their pragmatism. And really, who can blame them? The only people left who can possibly call themselves purist libertarians are people who think that thousands of years of culture, conditioning, and nature can be overridden by 200-page Facebook rants about the NAP.
Here's one. What do you call someone who thinks that you can overcome centuries worth of deeply ingrained culture and ideology by holding up a sign? Actually, I'd call them unfairly characterized.
They have this absurdly optimistic view of human nature in common with neoconservatives, except neoconservatives tend to prefer to invade cultures they disagree with, then shoot the people who resist, whereas establishment libertarians, on the other hand, like to be invaded by the cultures that disagree with them, and then the only violence they're capable of is making those people want to kill themselves with their pointless utopian ranting.
Okay, that one hurt a little bit. That one hurt, Lauren. You hit me in the... But here's the thing. Most of us are concerned about the invasion that's happening right here and right now. You know, the government comes through my door, sits down at my kitchen table, slaps my wife on the ass, takes half my shit, marches my kid off to be indoctrinated for 12 years, tells my wife and I we got to get both our asses out the door to work because some irresponsible folks are squeezing out babies they can't afford, and we're going to need to pay for that. And they have to distribute our protection money to all their friends so that they can stay in business. Then they socialize my profession. They expose me to fentanyl regularly on the job because of their ridiculous and evil drug war. And I tell government to get out of my house, and some schmuck says to me, "If you don't like it, leave." It's my house, dummy. Look, maybe I've got a skewed perspective here. Maybe it's not the institution that has tried to destroy my family that I should be focused on here. Maybe it's some dumb college kid who thinks that we have a real rape problem in Canada. That's my biggest threat. Maybe it's some guy who can't speak English at selling Slurpees at the local 7-Eleven who's ruining my life. Maybe it's that social media platform that was invented like 10 seconds ago that never existed before, that lets me do things I never imagined possible, that's basically free, that is completely voluntary, that is destroying my culture because it won't let me make fun of libtards. Maybe my biggest threat is a theocrat somewhere who's fleeing across an ocean of water, running away from the instability that my government had a hand in creating towards the handout that my government is now giving them. Maybe those are my problems. I don't know. But right now, as we speak, there's a Leviathan in my kitchen slapping my wife on the ass, telling her to get her ass out the door, get to work, because this tax farm ain't going to milk itself. Maybe what I should do is bend over the kitchen table and spread my cheeks wide and say, "Please, Daddy, I'll do whatever you want. Just protect me from all the problems that you created."
That was probably a little harsh, but it's not easy to watch a movement kill itself after you've put so much time and energy into promoting its ideals and believing in it. So this has been a long time coming and needed to be said, and I hope some of you guys enjoyed the video. If you didn't, well, there's plenty of space in the comment section to scream statist at me, so I look forward to reading that. But I guess I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.
Oh, no, I was the harsh one there, Lauren. I'm sorry. I probably got a little too hyperbolic. But these are some of the thoughts that have been rolling around in my head for a while now. And Lauren does echo a lot of the common tropes that I see out there against libertarian. And I don't think they're necessarily all that unfair. I mean, it might be easier for me to dismiss these criticisms as libertarian derangement syndrome, but I don't think that implying other people are mentally ill is going to help us out. And I frankly don't believe it. And so I think Lauren is legitimately frustrated. And I actually share a lot of Lauren's frustrations here. In fact, I probably feel it far more acutely than she does. Lauren is a libertarian and she's criticizing other libertarians. That's kind of what we do. That's kind of what's frustrating about being a libertarian as well. You know, I remember thinking during the general election in the U.S. that both Hillary and Trump were making some pretty significant gaffes and saying some pretty ridiculous things, and even more ridiculous than some of the gaffes Gary Johnson made. But the difference between Gary and these other two was that Trump and Hillary had rabid loyalists defending their gaffes. I mean, Trump would could make fart noises with his mouth, and that it would be explained as four-dimensional chess. You know, conservative pragmatism taken to the next level to obliterate the leftists and the media. And Gary, God rest his soul, only had libertarians in his corner, and libertarians are quick to throw each other under the bus and disavow any association with other libertarians. And, you know, that fierce individualism is the strength and the beauty of libertarians, but it's also sometimes our biggest weakness. And, you know, when Gary said bake the cake, everyone jumped on him, of course. But when I looked at an interview with him where he was actually explaining his policy, it was kind of coherent and thought out. And, you know, it's similar to the trust busting policy that the alt-right is advancing to break up big corporations. But absolutely no libertarian went out there and defended him that I could see. And so, you know, in this divisive political climate, the left tends to see Nazis and fascists everywhere, and the right tends to see SJW communists everywhere. So I want to talk a little bit about why this is, because I think it's very important. First of all, I think it's helpful to view political preference as a projection of family preference. And by that I mean, you know, people who tend to be attracted to the left are people who care about mom things. They you know, what do traditional moms care about? Well, they, you know, care about nurturing the weak and marginalized. They ensure everyone is included in family activities. They encourage sharing. They're caretakers of the family environment. Sound familiar? I mean, these are the same things that people are attracted to the political left care about, right? And on the other side, you see people who care about traditional dad things being attracted to the right. So traditionally, dads maintain vigilance towards external threats. They gather resources for the family. They enforce boundaries. You know, that's where your mom starts and you stop, mister. And they enforce family rules. Now, in a healthy family, you need mom and dad. You know, in fact, in a healthy family, mom really appreciates dad going out and doing the hard, brutish work that keeps the family safe and fed. In a healthy family, dad really appreciates the work mom does at home, creating a wonderful, nurturing environment. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all the things that my wife does around the home, making it warm, inviting, welcoming environment. I rush home from work afterwards. I can't wait to get home because of what she's did. You know, as a bachelor, my house certainly didn't look like this. Now, imagine that an ideal society looks like this family. Like, you know, you have people who focus on keeping the nation safe, who gather resources, who enforce rules and boundaries, who are willing and ready to put it on the line for their fellow countrymen. And then you have people who are focused on lifting up the helpless, who are looking at ways to share their bounty with the less fortunate, who are, you know, trying to find ways to make the world more beautiful and a better place to live. And let's suppose now that you had a society that had tight family and social cohesion, where these people with different focuses, the mums and the dads, really appreciated each other. How would you go about destroying that society? Well, I'd start by destroying the family, maybe by subsidizing single motherhood or having the government in charge of issuing marriage licenses or instantiating no-fault divorce into law. You know, I might do something like increase the size and scope of the state because I want this society to be a zero-sum game of winners and losers. And then I'd start to demonize masculine interests if I was feminine. And I'd demonize feminine interests if I was masculine. You know, as the society starts to fall apart and the size and intrusive nature of the government grows, you start to get a reinforcing feedback loop. It picks up speed. You know, if your side doesn't grab that gun called government and use it on the other side, then you can be good and damn sure that the other side is going to grab it and use it on you. And pretty soon, you're finding ideologies that justify your behavior and give some credibility to your fears. And eventually, society becomes a desperate, fear-based power grab that destroys everything we love. And this is what I see happening now. You know, I don't think it's any coincidence that You see broken families with moms and dads at each other's throats in divorce proceedings. At the same time, you see social justice warriors versus alt-righters. At the same time, you see third-wave feminists versus men's rights activists. At the same time, you see a growing divide between conservatives and liberals. As far as I can see, you can jump on this reinforcing feedback loop and add energy to it by demonizing people who don't think like you. And you can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Or you can try and break the cycle. Now, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I choose to try and break the cycle. Call me soft, call me doe-eyed, Bambi, utopian, whatever words you want to use to disparage that perspective. But, I did this as party leader when I had members of my party take great offense to what Lauren was doing as a candidate. And I defended Lauren and in hindsight, I think they saw her as a threat to their identity. They didn't like her kind of masculine confrontational style. And she seemed to be treading dangerously close to attacking some of the things they strongly cared about. And now these executives were far from social justice warriors, as far as I could tell. They weren't advocating for anything but the repeal of government policies, but their area of focus was on LGBT issues. And so they were more focused on mom things than dad things. And they didn't want to see the government marginalizing and hammering down people that they identified as being oppressed. And so they were looking at ways that government was doing that. And, and then Breitbart enters the picture and paints them as SJWs because to some people, if you care more about mom things than dad things, you're a cuck. And so here we have Breitbart essentially making the same mistake from my estimation that my party executives made. They identify someone as the enemy who isn't at all the enemy. And these people are all on the same team at the end of the day. They want the same things: strong property rights, limited government, more freedom. Yet we're all trained to categorize people that don't think like us as the enemy, even though they want essentially the same thing politically. So here we have an organization that by almost any objective standard has become the enemy of the individual. And we're busy identifying the characteristics in other people. We're ignoring that organization, and instead we're focusing on other people that have zero power. And we're identifying characteristics in those people that in a sane world would make them good spouses to us. But now they're the enemy for having those traits. I mean, I love my wife. I love that she cares about people. She sees oppressed or marginalized people in our private life, and she feels immediate empathy and wants to do something about it. And now I'm supposed to hate other people that have her same heart and see the world from her perspective. I'm supposed to identify these people as libtards and cucks or are selected or something like that. Well, I'm sorry. I can't do that because I love my wife. And yeah, sometimes my wife has an idea that's irrational. I don't hate her for that. I have a conversation with her, and my wife loves me because I work hard and provide for the family and protect them. She loves me because I'm the person who gets the kids out of their comfort zone and taking risks. I'll be the one to eventually lovingly boot them out the door to make their own way in life. That's something she'll never be able to do, and I love her for that. But see, she's supposed to see people like me in society as cold, heartless patriarchs or fascists. That's the narrative that we're supposed to have. So I'm interested in trying to help people disabuse harmful ideas, not their biological or familial preferences. I think that a lot of what's going on here today is disparagement of the innate biology that keeps our civilization functioning and flourishing. I think almost every time the word cuck or fascist is used to disparage someone, it's further eroding the fabric of our civilization. And, I think maybe that some SJWs and alt-righters actually want civilization to burn so they can build a matriarchal or patriarchal phoenix from its ashes. But I think most of us want to preserve what's left and rehabilitate our culture. Obviously, this isn't going to be easy, and there's no quick fix, and no government policy is going to turn this around. The government has turned us against each other. And my hope is to try to turn that around. It's not easy when you have people that are trained by powerful entities to turn on each other. Our society can only function on a foundation of liberty. That's what we're fighting for every day in the Libertarian Party of Canada. I know for a fact that this is the same fight that's going on in the libertarian parties in the United States. We're just average, everyday citizens of our nation trying to make sacrifices here and now so that we can have a brighter future. I think what Lauren is doing is valuable. And Lauren, if you're hearing this video, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about some of these issues and see if we can't sort ourselves out.